The Holy Gospel according to Mark, the 5th chapter. Jesus and the disciples came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him any more, even with a chain, for he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed. This is the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. A Vikings fan finally gets his ticket to his very first game at US Bank Stadium. He had been waiting for this day for a very long time. So he got there, made sure he stopped at the concession stand, got himself one of those Kramarczyk brats and a nice frosty beverage, and went and found his seat. And just as he had sat down, he heard somewhere behind him this voice saying, "Steve, Steve, hey, Steve." So he stood up and turned around and looked, and he couldn't see who was yelling or what was going on. So he sat down, and just as he was about to take his first bite of that delicious brat, he heard from behind him again, "Steve, hey, Steve." So he stood up and looked around, and he just couldn't see what was going on, who was yelling. So he sat down and grabbed his frosty beverage, and just as he was about to take a sip, he heard, "Hey, Steve, Steve." And now he was mad. So he stood up, turned around, and yelled, "My name's not Steve." That's my 9-year-old's favorite joke. So his name's not Steve. But who are you? Now, there are, of course, lots of ways to answer that question. You could give your name. My name's not Steve, it's Joel. You could give your job title. I'm a pastor. You could give your relationships. I'm a father, a son, a husband. You could give your interests and your hobbies. I'm a runner and a Twins fan. You could give your nationality, your political affiliation, the schools you've gone to, and so on and so forth. But as Jonathan Martin writes, who are you really behind the avatars you've created for yourself? What are you covering up? What are you afraid of? What are you hoping for? Where are you going? If you're like most people in our society, you live in a perpetual identity crisis with countless voices competing for your attention across a dizzying array of platforms telling you who you are and who you ought to be. Because you see, if you want to make a difference, and I assume each one of us wants our lives to matter, if you want to make a difference, you need to know who you are. Identity is important. Your identity is important. So, of course, first things first, what is your name? And this one seems really easy because from the earliest moments when we're able to communicate, we know the answer. Even if the people who write our names on the cups at Starbucks always get it wrong, we know our names. But there was a man who lived among the tombs in a place of death and decay, who would howl night and day and punish himself and injure himself. He was that man who parents warned their children about. He was the reason people would guard their homes. And he also made the other townspeople feel better about themselves because they weren't like him. Yet Jesus didn't heed all those warnings. He didn't guard himself or get haughty. Jesus went to that man and asked him, "What is your name?" And the man hissed, "My name is Legion, for we are many." But his name's not Legion. Demons had overtaken his body and twisted him so much that he lost his very identity. He did not know his own name. The man didn't know who he was. And we could shake our heads at the tragedy of it all, or we could stop and assess our own lives and consider if maybe, just maybe, we have something in common with this man. You see, his life was marked by chaos and isolation. And how many of us are overwhelmed by our schedules and responsibilities and all that's going on around us? How many of us live in chaos, at least part of the time? And how many of us, at least at some level, feel lonely and isolated? Even with how connected we're supposed to feel with technology and things like social media, many of us tend to be very lonely people. You see, whatever those demons were that possessed the man who lived among the tombs, they messed him up. And there are demons who mess us up too. Now, regardless of how you think of them, there are demons that tell us to be something, to be someone other than who we are. Your demons may not be named Legion, but they may be named addiction, or they may be named greed or lust or envy, or they may be named overwork or laziness, or they may be named perfectionism or chronic complaining. Whatever their name is, they're there. The story of the demon-possessed man who lived among the tombs in chaos and isolation is our story. And that's actually good news. It's good news because in this story, we can see how Jesus breaks into our lives to free us from whatever demons hold us captive. Jesus didn't shy away from the death and decay of the tombs. Jesus didn't keep his distance from the bruised and battered man. Jesus did not allow chaos and isolation to have the last word. Jesus broke through all those barriers in order to go to the man and heal him. And regardless of what demons possess us, Jesus comes to heal us too. So the first part of my response to today's question, how can I make a difference, is this: let Jesus do his thing. Let Jesus come to you. Let Jesus heal you. Let Jesus send your demons cascading out from you, just as those demons fled the man in the tombs and tumbled into the sea in that herd of pigs. This may involve things like surrender, trust, obedience even, prayer, listening, worship. And when you let Jesus do his thing, you will know whose you are. And when you know whose you are, you can then know who you are. Which is the second part of my response today. How can you make a difference? First, let Jesus do his thing. And second, be who God created you to be. The rich resource of the Psalms tells us this very thing. Listen to these words from Psalm 139. For it was you who formed me in my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. So you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And God doesn't make junk. God created you on purpose, for a purpose. Jesus heals you and saves you so you can make a difference. And the best way to make a difference is to simply be who God created you to be. And you see, in order to make a difference, it means that something has to be, well, different. Which is why Jesus heals us and changes us. So that we can be, as our Vacation Bible School students have been learning this month, God's agents of change. That's the elementary school VBS theme, God's agents of change. And this theme, it's a playoff of the Marvel show, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Each day of VBS has a different theme: compassion, inclusion, forgiveness, and justice. This whole idea is based on the words of Paul in Romans 12, verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. Transformed, changed, different. And over the course of these weeks, I've shared with the students, these VBS students, that my favorite scene in a Marvel movie, since they've been thinking about Marvel shows and movies, but my favorite scene in a Marvel movie is from Captain Marvel, when the main character, Captain Marvel, you get it? Just watch the movie. She's being held captive. My name is Carol. And it's at that moment when she claims her identity that she is set free. And she can use her superpowers. And I'm not going to spoil it whether she saves the day or not. All right? No spoilers here. But what I told the students is that as God's agents of change, they have superpowers too. And their superpowers also come from their identity as ones who are named and claimed by God. And their superpowers are those four daily themes: compassion, inclusion, forgiveness, and justice. As God's agents of change, they make a difference by using their superpowers in their lives. That's exactly what a group of our high school youth experienced earlier this month on their mission trip to Kalispell, Montana. In fact, here's a beautiful video made by Cassie Jansen, one of the youth on the trip. And this shows how the group worked together to make a difference. Kids these days, they're pretty great. Now, as she reflected with me about her trip, Cassie, the girl who made the video, she told me that this trip was a great chance for her to give of herself and to see beyond just the world she's used to and her own wants. And this group grew close together. They were profoundly impacted by having to live and work together and by serving alongside the people of Kalispell. And they'll keep growing and learning and serving and leading. They'll keep living with compassion, inclusion, forgiveness, and justice. They were and they are God's agents of change. And so are we. First, let Jesus do his thing. Then be who God created you to be. And that can be surprising to learn, which is what the no longer demon-possessed man learned. Because he wanted to go with Jesus, to get out of his hometown, to hit the road, to be away from the judgmental and fearful eyes of the other people in town. But Jesus tells him to stay. Go home to your friends, Jesus says, and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you. And the man does just that. So Jesus may invite you to stay. Jesus may invite you to go. Either way, he will be with you, and you will be his. So let Jesus do his thing and be who God created you to be. That's how you can make a difference. Amen.